Manufacturing as a springboard for Nigeria's economic growth was the focal point of discussion at the March 2018 Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce breakfast meeting. Advisor to the Honorable Minister of Trade and Investment, Mr. Femi Edun, shared how Nigeria can reposition the manufacturing sector to drive its economy.
With the devaluation of the currency over the last 2 years, our costs have become, certainly our labor costs have become a lot more competitive. We are not yet a competitive producer of power, so our power costs are high, infrastructure costs are prohibitive, logistic costs are high, input costs are high, and all of those are reasons why manufacturing is not thriving. But there is a policy response to that, and I'd like to talk about that. So, the government recently launched an economic recovery and growth plan that was supposed to restore growth, invest in people by, trying to engender a lot more inclusive growth, a lot more job-rich growth. So the oil sector, which has been 95% of foreign exchange earnings, is only about 20% or so of GDP because it doesn't create lots of jobs. We want to build a competitive economy and we want to be able to compete globally. But to do that, there are a number of things that the ERGP requires us to focus on. The first is to stabilize the macroeconomic environment by bringing more alignment between our monetary, trade, and fiscal policies. But I must confess that that is an ongoing work in progress. To accelerate non-oil revenue growth, to cut the costs of governance, extend the privatization program. The second pillar is achieving food security by delivering on our agricultural transformation agenda, reducing our dependence on imported food, particularly cereals like rice and wheat, reducing our dependence on imported sugar, and increasing local production of these things at competitive prices. The other is to improve our transportation infrastructure, because many manufacturers will tell you that transportation costs make their products internationally uncompetitive. Fourth pillar of the ERGP is energy sufficiency, which calls for increasing output of oil, expanding power infrastructure, and reducing our dependence on imported refined products. The final pillar is the industrialization agenda, which requires us to improve the ease of doing business and accelerate the implementation of the NIRP, the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan. Now, what the NIRP wants to achieve essentially is to make Nigeria a manufacturing location again. When we talk about it, we like to say, and sometimes we need to motivate ourselves with grand vision, so we like to say that we want to make Nigeria the preeminent manufacturing hub in Africa. That's a stretch goal because we're very far from there. But that's also an achievable goal, because the more we go around, and we spent a significant part of the last 1 year going around talking to investors all over the world, and the more we talk to investors, the more the reality is that what we have is really an execution challenge. If we do all the things that we say we want to do, if we implement the plan, it can happen. So we'd like to get manufacturing growing again. We'd like it to become a much bigger slice of GDP. The target is to hit 20%. The idea is to create 2 million manufacturing jobs directly, so that the multiplier effect of that can kick in. The idea is to ensure that we can use manufacturing to generate foreign exchange again. And then a very big part of the plan is about value chains, using our factor endowments, using the resources that we have and linking them to manufacturing, taking our agricultural output and making sure that we can link that all the way to manufactured output. So, if you think about this, it requires a much stronger handshake between government and the private sector. And that's one of the reasons why the Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council was set up last year. The Policy Council is already working, and there are a number of interventions that are in process. The unfortunate reality with many of these things is that when you're trying to fix a rot that's taken many years to set in, the results don't come quickly. So there's a lot of foundational work that is going on now, results of which will begin to emerge in 2019, in 2020, and beyond. But I would like to just say, and I'm saying this from the perspective of, I would say, an insider, we're trying to make policy and reform a lot stickier than it used to be. And one of the key elements of that stickiness strategy is working a lot more with the private sector. When policy implementation is anchored in the hands of private people who have invested their resources in the implementation of that policy, then you're likely to see a lot more continuity from one administration to the next. And the model we like to talk about is the model of Nigeria LNG. Nigeria LNG is probably the most successful public-private partnership in Nigeria. It's a partnership between the international oil companies led by Shell and government, with NNPC being the partner on the government side. So in between government and NNPC is the IFC, which is like the honest broker of the relationship, with a very small minority stake and the equal stakes held by both government and the IOCs. So Nigeria has gas, and the IOCs have the skills and the supply chains. So we bring the gas into the joint venture. The IOCs put capital in, they put management in, and they retain control of the business. Now what has happened? Nigeria LNG has become the owner of the largest fleet of gas vessels in the world. It has made profits continuously for over 20 years. After trains 1 and 2, trains 3 and 4, it has financed all of its reinvestment from internally generated cash flow. And the most important part of it, as a lesson towards the point I made about stickiness, is that despite all of the changes in government, despite the number of administrations that have come and gone since Nigeria LNG was set up, no one has touched it. And that's because it was carefully designed to be sticky. So what we're doing is taking that NLNG model and using the learnings from it to develop the partnerships and the collaborations with the private sector around which we're trying to anchor the implementation of the NIRP. And the bit of it that I will end my conversation this morning about, or well, my monologue. The first part of the conversation will just be me talking. So I'll end the monologue by talking about special economic zones. So what we have chosen to do based on advice is to use our special economic zones to drive our desire to get investment into export-oriented manufacturing in Nigeria. So Nigeria wrote the first free trade zone law on the continent in 1992. But if you look around Nigeria and you look at what we call our free trade zones, there are really very few examples of a world-class manufacturing environment in any of them. What they were supposed to do was to be magnets for investment, develop world-class infrastructure, and put incentives and an easy framework for doing business. So you have world-class infrastructure, you have attractive fiscal incentives, and you have ease of doing business. And that was supposed to attract investment into export-oriented manufacturing. But it didn't happen, largely because we didn't invest in the world-class infrastructure. When we talk to investors, one of the things that we hear consistently is that the infrastructure and the cost competitiveness is actually more important than the incentives. That investors are a lot more keen to find world-class places to do business, where it is easy to bring in your raw materials, easy to put them on a ship or on a plane and send them out into the world, where it's easy to get finance, where government doesn't stifle your operations, where you can have a true one-stop shop. So rather than a big hall that's got 26 tables, that's an example of a one-stop shop. Why don't you have one computer screen where you can talk to government in one place? So this is what we're trying to do. We're investing in infrastructure in our special economic zones. We are using technology to create a true one-stop shop where your interface with government is just one click of a button, and you're dealing with government on an electronic interface where you submit documents once. And when you have submitted once and you need to submit it to 26 agencies, you submit once, you submit to all. Where you get all your permits and your approvals electronically. And this has been done. It's not rocket science. So what we're doing is just replicating what's working in other places. So we're bringing government investment in partnerships with private investors into creating world-class infrastructure in a few locations across the country. China has done it. Ghana is doing it. So what we're trying to do is replicate all of these ideas in Nigeria. So we've identified a number of locations where we're doing pilot projects, working with the private sector, working with development finance institutions like Afrexim Bank, our Sovereign Investment Authority, the AFDB, and major players in industrial real estate, people who have experience building industrial parks, operating free trade zones. We are doing a pilot project in the northwest quadrant of Lekki Free Trade Zone. We are working with the sponsors of Enyimba City in Abia State to create a magnet for the entire southeast in Abia, on the outskirts of Aba. We're working with private developers to build a cotton cluster in Funtua, which is the heart of cotton cultivation in northern Nigeria. We're working with the sponsors of Ibom Deep Sea Port and Industrial City to create a world-class port and free trade zone in the South-South. There's a number of other projects that are coming up in which government is putting strategic investment in and attracting private investment to create world-class infrastructure. And the most interesting thing about this is that we're also trying to do it slightly differently from what government typically does. What we've done in the past is build it and wait for them to come. This time we're doing it the way private developers build things. We're building around anchor investors. Manufacturing jobs are a lot stronger in terms of their economic impact than jobs in agriculture and mining. Manufacturing jobs bring technology to the worker. They give higher income. They have a higher multiplier. So the economic impact of one manufacturing job is almost like the equivalent of 5 agricultural jobs. So it's very important for us, if we're serious about getting employment going in Nigeria, to focus on manufacturing.
With the economic recovery and growth plan of the federal government giving top priority to manufacturing, it is expected that a robust public-private partnership will see Nigeria leveraging the opportunities to become a productive economy.